These are the parts to a $300 gaming PC, and in this video I'm going to show you how to put it together, how to install all the drivers so that you're ready for gaming, and of course, show you how it'll perform and what your FPS numbers might be at 1080p. All you're going to need is a screwdriver and a flash drive for Windows, but before we get started, this video is made possible by our sponsor, Jawa.gg. Jawa is the #1 online marketplace for gamers to buy and sell new and used gamer gear and get some awesome custom gaming PCs at amazing prices. Jawa's mission is to be the #1 community where great gaming gear is sold at reasonable prices between gamers. You can shop for your next gaming PC or for a PC upgrade. It's one of the only places I've found on the internet that gives reasonable cheap PCs that you know are going to work. Like this one for only $450 that has a Ryzen 5 2600 and a GTX 1060. Not to mention you can snag great GPU deals like this 2070 Super for only $180. That's on par with the 3060. That's saving you a ton of money. And you can rest assured that your money's safe because they secure all their transactions and offer buyer and seller protections so that everyone involved in the transaction can feel completely safe about it. If you want to check Jawa out, there's a link down in the description and use the code MMillerPC10 for $10 off. Now for this PC build, we're going to use mostly used parts, except for a few things will be brand new. We got some of the things from AliExpress, but if you don't feel comfortable buying from AliExpress, again, the sponsor of this video, Jawa.gg, would be a great place to look for used parts to help you complete this build and stay under and in your budget. Our motherboard, we're actually rocking a B450 from AliExpress. We've seen several videos on this board, and so we're going to use it in this build. Of course, you could also look for a used B450 board. We paid around $45, $48 for this one, and so as long as you stayed around the $50 range, you would still be able to stay in budget. So all you do is take the motherboard out of the box itself, and the motherboard will come with this. We call this an IO shield. We're just going to set it to the side. Want to close the motherboard box back up and set the motherboard on top of the box. All right, so now once we have the motherboard on top of the box, I like to install the CPU next. And our CPU that we're using for this build is the Ryzen 5 2600. Again, we picked this up off AliExpress. Around $30, $35, that's what you kind of want to look for with this. Again, you can get it used off Jawa.gg. If you're patient and look for something similar and in that price range, you would be okay and happy with this type of CPU. Again, you got to make compromises with a PC that's this cheap, but Ryzen CPUs and AM4 platform gives you room to upgrade later on. Now, with these Ryzen CPUs, you want to be careful because there are a bunch of tiny pins on this side, so we want to be super careful. I like to set the motherboard like this so that you see this top part that's close to what these are, the RAM slots. We want to set it like that, and then there's this tiny lever, all right, that we kind of want to pull to the side and lift up nice and gently. That gets the CPU ready. And again, we're gonna have Ryzen facing up like this, going down towards the socket. And if you have it turned that way, now it will just fall perfectly into place. You don't have to do anything crazy. I like to just take the sides and just barely bump it, see if it's got any wiggle. And then we're gonna push this lever back down so that it will go into place like it's supposed to. So again, your CPU and your motherboard should look like this. So I wanna make sure you have plenty of angles so you can see how it's supposed to be. Because sometimes when people do step-by-step guides, they don't do a good job of showing you how it should look when you're done with the steps, so you can just make sure that you're doing it correctly. Next up, we got 16 gigs of RAM here, DDR4 RAM, that's important. You wanna make sure you get that. Now, I got this RAM used for only $20 and $20 to $25 if you're patient and you look at these websites online that we've talked about in these videos, you can find some DDR4 RAM. Again, DDR4 3200 megahertz. You want to at least 3000. 3200 is preferred. If you can get 3600, that's even better, but for 20 bucks, you're probably not going to get 3600, and 20 bucks for RAM is a really good price. So 2025, that's what I would budget for. And we're going to put it in these two slots that are over here. Now this motherboard only has 2 slots. Depending on what motherboard you got, you might have 4 slots. If it does have 4 slots, you want to start with the CPU, skip the first one, put RAM in the second one, skip the third one, put RAM in the fourth one. But we're not doing that because we only have 2. So we just want to make sure that we line this notch up with the notch that is in the motherboard right here, as you can see. Sometimes they have these little tabs on both sides. Ours only has it on one. So you want to pull those back and you want to make sure those slots are aligned up like so. All right, once you get them lined up, I would still leave it on top of the box like we have here and just kind of put equal pressure on both sides, and you'll probably just hear one click. You might hear two, just depends on how equal your pressure is, but it will snap into place. And then you do the same thing with the next RAM stick, getting it in the right spot and then just clicking it in. And so now we have both our RAM sticks in and our CPU. Next, I'm gonna install the SSD. And the SSD, you wanna put it right here. You're gonna look for this little notch right here. It's in your motherboard. It is an M.2 slot. Sometimes it's like right under the CPU, like right in here. It depends on what your motherboard is. This motherboard has it down here, and it will have a little spot for it, like a little tiny screw to go into. The little screw should be in the box, and sometimes this little adapter thing is also in the box. You just have to check it and see. Another thing, since I got this CPU from AliExpress, it did not come with this battery, which is like a CR 2032, maybe? Yeah, 2032. Yeah. So you can get these batteries for like $3 off Amazon if your motherboard doesn't have one. And sometimes buying a used motherboard, it may not have it. So that's something you can do as well. Now, again, we got to cut corners in some places for builds like this. And so we're using a KingSpec 512 gigabyte. Now, KingSpec is a decent brand. They're pretty solid, but where we're cutting corners is we're not using 1 terabyte. We're only using 512 gigs, which will be fine for 3 or 4 games, depending on the size, or maybe like 1 game of Call of Duty, which this PC will be able to run Call of Duty. And so as you can see, these M.2 SSDs, there's a little notch right here. And so inside the slot on this motherboard, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take the drive. All right, we want to go in at a 45-degree angle like so. I had to change the lighting just a little bit so you could see it better. Go in at a 45-degree angle, and then you're going to take one of the little tiny screws that come with this. And I like to use a magnetic screwdriver, which I'll have linked down in the description if you like it. It is the Linus Tech Tip screwdriver, and we want to put that little screw in the hole that's connected right there, and now your SSD is installed. And then the last thing for the motherboard before we put it into the case and get the case ready is we're going to actually take off these little hook things here. These hooks are not great for the cooler that we're going to use. We don't want to have those in there, so we want to take those off if we can, or that we definitely can. Some coolers use these little hooks. The one we're using is just the stock cooler, and it does not use the hooks. Now, depending on if you bought your cooler new or used, your cooler may not. Now, depending on whether you bought your CPU new or used, you may not have a stock cooler. All right, so this is the AMD stock cooler. You can pick these up for like $5 or $7 off Amazon, pretty much any day of the week, pretty easy. If you buy it brand new, it probably will come with thermal paste on it. If not, a lot of the AliExpress CPUs come with thermal paste in the package now, and so you can use that. You shouldn't have to buy thermal paste. If you do, I will link a brand that I like down in the description. But once we have those hooks out, there are 4 screw holes that were in there, like what you see here. And we're gonna line these screws up in those 4 screw holes, and we're gonna line all of that up there. But before you do that, you wanna make sure that you put thermal paste on the CPU. Now again, if the thermal paste is already on your cooler, then you don't need to do this, or if it comes in a little package from AliExpress, you can just put it right there in the middle. I like to just put a good little pea-sized dot right there in the middle. That's plenty for what we need. And again, if you need thermal paste, I'll have this link down below. I keep this around MX4. I like it. And so that's what we're gonna do. Then we're gonna take our CPU cooler, and again, we're gonna line these screws up with these holes, and we're gonna gently drop it in there. All right, again, I like to put the AMD logo facing to the left. There is a way for you to flip it around to where the AMD logo's up here, but you have to like take a bunch of stuff apart, and it's just not worth it for this video for us to do that. So we're gonna leave it like so. We're gonna take those screws, and we're gonna kind of go in an X pattern. So I'm gonna go a couple screws up here in the upper left, and then I'm gonna go down here to the bottom right, and I'm gonna screw a few times, and then over here to the bottom left, let it go in a couple times, and the bottom right, let it go in a couple times. And I'm gonna repeat that pattern. I'm just gonna keep going in this X pattern, 2 or 3 turns at each spot, 3 or 4 turns each spot, whatever pattern you wanna go in. You gotta press down a little bit each time you do it. Make sure you get that tight seal. And the main reason you go in this X pattern is to make sure that the thermal paste spreads out evenly. And once they're all snug, you don't have to over tighten them at all. Once they're all snug, we're gonna plug up this cord, which, you know, I don't mind it. It's gonna dangle up here a little bit, but that doesn't bother me that much. And where we're gonna put the cord, so to plug up this cord, there are two places up here at the top of the motherboard. One of them will say system fan, and one of them will say CPU fan. All right, you wanna make sure you put it in the CPU fan. I think this is upside down by the way that you're looking at it, but you should be able to see. Let's see if I can turn it around so that you can see it a little better. If you zoom out right here, you should be able to see CPU fan up here on the right side, hopefully. Maybe, there we go. We can see it pretty good right there. And so that means we're gonna plug it in this one on the right. And so there's a little notch here. So we want the little notch to be facing towards us, and we're gonna plug it into the top right one. Again, every motherboard's slightly different, so you just need to find the one that says CPU fan and plug it in just like that. The plugs will look the same. They have 4 pins up here, and so that's what we're looking for. Now your motherboard's ready, and we can get the case ready that's over here, and we can be ready to be one step closer to gaming on a PC. Okay, so now that we have the motherboard ready, we're going to get the case ready to put the motherboard in it. We're going with the case here is the DIY PC Cube 01. It does not come with fans, so we picked up these TLC 120S fans from Thermalright. Really easy, cheap fans. They're like 13 bucks. And the case is like 51, so you're like in around $64 total for the case. There are cheaper case options out there, but depending on, you know, what you're wanting, you'll at least have a case where you can upgrade and still look really nice in the future. Or if you're doing it for PC flipping like I'm going to do, this case is gonna make it a little bit easier to sell because it looks nicer, and we got RGB fans. Now to get the case ready, we've got these 4 screws right here. We're gonna undo all 4 of these screws. And once you have all the screws undone, you're going to take, oh, don't do that. But we're gonna take the glass panel off, and I put it back in the box. Okay, so put it back in the box it come in. That way you don't accidentally break it. Then take the 4 screws that we just took out and put them back in the holes so you don't lose them. Then on the back panel, we're gonna do the same thing. Undo the 2 screws. There's one at the top and one on the bottom. Slide the back panel out and take it off. Again, put it back in the box so you don't lose it. And put the 2 screws back in the holes so you don't lose those either. Then we're gonna take our fans and undo all the cross ties that had the cords all jacked up. And you want all the slack in the cords because it's easier to cable manage that way. All right, so on this side of the case here, we're gonna put 2 fans. Now, you can put them up like this so it looks nicer, but the airflow won't be quite as good, so it's totally up to you. I'm gonna put them in the other way so it has better airflow. So the back is going to be facing you. And I'm gonna put this one on top, so I want the cord kind of facing the bottom. And there's some holes like right here in the case that we're gonna run the cords through. And then the fan will be flush up to the back. I like to take these extra cords that are in the back and just wrap them over the top so they don't get in my way while I'm installing the fans. So to give you a better look, again, the cord's coming through this little hole right here on the side, and the fan is facing us. Again, you can flip it the other way if you want to make it look better. Airflow will just be slightly worse. All right, then we're gonna take these screws right here that come with the fans. These are our fan screws, and we're gonna put one in the corner here and one in the other corner up in the left. And I'm just gonna leave them diagonally like that for now so that I can make sure I get the other fan in here and get them where I want them. We're gonna do the exact same thing with the other fan, except now I want the cord to kind of be in the upper right so that they're kind of here together. So again, go in through the front side of the case, and then we're here on the back. The cord's pulled through this little hole, and we're gonna do the same thing, put 1 screw in each corner. It doesn't really matter which corners you use. And then once you have the fans exactly where you want them, you can just screw in the rest of the screws in the holes. And once you have everything done, you'll have your cords right here together, nice and clean, which we'll talk about how to plug them up later. Now, the last fan is gonna go here in the back of the case. So again, opposite of these other 2 fans, I want the cord to be in the upper right, and we're gonna have it facing like this. And there is a hole up here in the upper right of the case that we're gonna run the cords through, and you wanna just pull them all the way to the back. So you'll have these 2 cords coming out the back and the fan right here. And again, we have 4 screws. You may have to take this little zip tie or the cross tie thing off so that it's not in your way, so that you can put the other screws in. Now, this screwdriver is great for putting fans in. It'll be linked down in the description. I don't like it for putting the other stuff in because the magnet's better with the LTT screwdriver, but these are the 2 screwdrivers I use. Again, they'll be in the description if you want them. But 1 screwdriver is definitely enough. You don't need 2. Now, our next step before we put the motherboard in is go ahead and put in this that come with your motherboard is the IO shield, and typically these 3 holes always go at the bottom bottom, so we're gonna put it down like this, and it goes in this little rectangular slot that's in the back of the case. So all you have to do is line it up and pop it into place, and it should just stay there. You might just have to make sure the fan cord doesn't get stuck in your way. Once you have that into place, we've got to check the placement of these holes that are on the motherboard with these standoffs that are on the case itself. So right now, this case only had 4 standoffs that were already installed. Typically, there's normally another one installed over here, but there wasn't. So we only have 4, and so we kind of have to line it up and see where we got and where we need our extra standoffs. So like these 2 top holes are okay. So for here and here, and then on the bottom, we're okay with this hole and this hole. And then last, this hole needs to also line up with this, because you can see they're directly across from each other on the motherboard. If it's a different type of micro ATX motherboard, it may be dropped a little bit lower, and you may have to move this standoff down to this one. So all we got to do is put our next 2 standoffs right there. All the screws you need do come in this little baggie that comes with the case, and I like to dump them in a magnetic tray, which again I'll have linked in the description. And inside that bag we should have the 2 standoffs that we need to fix the motherboard. Again, we're going to put one there and one there. Once you get all the standoffs in the right spot, you're ready to now install the motherboard. Okay, so once we have all these standoffs ready to go, I'm going to lay the case down on its back. That's the way I like to do it, so that I can easily just set the motherboard inside the case. Now, when we set it inside the case, what we want to make sure of is that we put once we put the motherboard inside the case, we want to make sure that all of the IO shield ports, none of them are blocked. It's easy to kind of get those blocked from time to time if we're not careful. And so like this right here is blocked HDMI, but you know, you're not going to be using that unless you're using an integrated graphics. So I'm going to leave that covered up, because if I flip this, I don't want anyone to plug their HDMI in there anyway. And then right here, the Ethernet was plugged up, so you can just kind of bend back this little metal piece right here. And if you are okay with leaving it like that, you can, or you can just keep bending it back and forth until it eventually pops off, which is going to be perfectly fine as well. Once you have all that lined up, you want to make sure that the holes on the motherboard themselves are also lined up. So as you can see right here by this hole, it kind of goes back and forth a little bit, and you can see where you want that outline to be completely flush so that your screw will fit down in that hole. Now for the screw, this is the motherboard screw that we're going to use. I want to make sure that it is a motherboard screw and not another type of screw that you're going to put in there. So we're going to put our screw on our screwdriver. Again, Linus Tech tip screwdriver is awesome so that we can have a super strong magnet, and we're going to put that in the correct spot. Make sure that everything is lined up correctly, and you don't want to force it. Like if you get everything lined up, the screw will go in there really easy. Like you're not going to have to like force it real hard. So you want to make sure that you get it lined up to where the screw goes in there super duper easy. And similar to the fans, I like to put them diagonally first. All right. Also, this little side metal thing, you can pop it out if you want over here on the left, but I accidentally just knocked it out. If you need to give yourself more room, totally do that. And once you get the diagonals done, it's easy to just get the rest of them situated. You don't put them in tight at all, just nice and snug, and you just go until you get all the screws in all the holes. All right, so after we get the motherboard installed, we're going to plug up the front panel connectors. Now this case is pretty simple. There's only 4 of them, and of course when I say 4, that includes the dreaded front panel IO. All right, as you can see here, I'm going to kind of like separate the fans here to the side so that we have easy access to underneath. The first cord we're going to plug up is HD audio. Now the first cord we're going to plug up is HD audio, and we're going to put it under the case in this little hole that's right here on the side, and it goes on the right side. Now you can plug all the cords up one at a time, or you can like put them all through here and then plug them up. I'm gonna kind of shove them all through, but you need to kind of know where this port is on your motherboard. So this port for me is right here. This is the USB 3.0 port. And sometimes depending on the motherboard, it's also over here on the right side. So you'll just have to kind of see where it is on your motherboard. So now back on the back side of the case, we're gonna stick this blue one, which is the USB 3.0. Sometimes it's solid black, but in our case here, it is a blue cord, and we're gonna stick it under the left-hand side hole that's on the bottom of the case down there. Then we have our USB cable, which we're also going to put on the right-hand side with the front panel audio. And then lastly, the front panel connectors, we're going to put those on the left-hand side underneath. All right, so we're gonna start with HD audio, and HD audio is gonna go in the bottom left down here. Normally the words are gonna be on the upper side, and we wanna make sure all those little holes line up. You will not have to force it, so just make sure that it is nice and easy going, and just slide it into place. After I plug plug it in, I like to tuck the excess cable back underneath. That will help with cable management later. Then we have our USB cord, and the USB has a USB header that looks like this down here. And if you are careful and read underneath, you will see like FUSB right above that port right there. And again, this only goes one way. Sometimes on the USBs, they want it upside down. So the USB, the letters are gonna be facing down, and you're gonna pop those on there as well, and tuck the excess cord underneath. Then we have our USB 3.0 cable. Again, it's going in this port, and you can see there's a small notch in the bottom right there, which means you need to line up this notch with that. So it's gonna be facing down, and it's gonna go right in that port that we just showed you and snap it in. That one does make kind of a click, so just be prepared for that. And again, tuck the excess cable back towards the back. And last, everybody's least favorite part is the front panel connectors. Now, these are clearly labeled in the motherboard manual, but typically this is how they go. I also like to pull them apart a little bit so I have some extra slack, but I start with HDD LED, and on the pins here, you can see these are color coded, which makes it really nice. I wish other motherboards would do this, but the 2 red go together, the 2 blue, the 2 black, and the 2 green. It even has a slight plus minus outline, if you can see that. I don't know if you can, but that makes it extremely nice for plugging these in. The HDD, like I said, we were gonna start with, goes on the bottom left. The next one is the reset switch, and that's gonna go right beside the LED. HD LED or HDD LED, and there'll be 1 pin left over here on the side. And these 2 cords are probably my least favorite, power LED plus and minus. They go with the plus going on the left and the minus going on the right, and they go right above the HDD LED. So it's the 2 upper leftmost pins, and you just gently slide them over the top. And of course, the last one is the power switch, and that one's gonna go above the reset switch, the 2 pins that go on the upper right. And again, there's gonna be 1 left over like so. So you will have them just like that, and the 1 pin left over on the side. And again, tuck the excess cable back underneath, and your front panel connectors are all plugged in. Now, I personally like to cable manage as I go. So what I like to do is take the cords that we just plugged up. Again, our fan cords are pulled out to the side and over here so that they're not in our way. And I want to just wrap up all those cables that we just plugged up together, and I want to line them up right in this corner right here. And there is a little standoff on the side here where you can wrap a zip tie through it. And I like to just get the zip tie started, and then again pull the cables the way that I want them, kind of again right up pressed up against this corner, and then pull the zip tie really tight up there in that corner. And I'm going to do another zip tie the same way up a little higher. Now, I'm not going to tighten them all the way right now because I might have to cut them later if I mess something up, but I want to go ahead and do that and get out of the way. These zip ties should come with your power supply or your case, one or the other, so you should have enough zip ties for that. Or you can just stuff them all in there at the end because there's plenty of room. Now we're going to plug up the fans. Again, we're doing all this before we plug up the power supply. So with the fans, you have 2 types of connectors: the actual power connector for the fan and the RGB header, which I like these fans because they are daisy chainable. $13 pack of fans, daisy chainable. I know Corsair fans that don't come with daisy chainable. So what I want to look for is a system fan plug-in. And it looks like on this motherboard, the only other fan header we have is up here in the top that's beside the CPU fan that we've already plugged up, and it looks like that. So it's going to plug up the same way. So we want our cable to probably come through this hole. And so we're going to go back and kind of use that to guide our cable management as we go. So since this top fan is the closest to that port that we have up there, we want that to be our plug-in. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the fan connectors from the other fan and plug it into this port right here, which is called a daisy chain for the other fans. So we're going to plug that up like that. And so these 2 fans power connectors are connected like so. And again, we're going to put that up in the upper right above this port right here. And again, we're going to take the same fan cable and the same adapter for the other fan, that is our 3rd fan that's up here, and plug them together. And now all 3 fans are daisy chained together, and we can take the 1 fan cord that is left that is unplugged like so and put it in this hole up at the top. And again, these little ports are facing down, and it's going to go right there above the CPU cooler so that it looks like so when you're done. Now, the other types of cables that come with your fans are RGB headers. So you have one end that looks like this and one end that's got 3 little prongs. And This particular motherboard does not have an RGB header, but I will show you how to daisy chain them together, and you can buy an RGB adapter if you would like so that you can change the colors of the fans. So same concept, you would find the port that's the closest and use the fan that is closest to you to kind of put that together. In our case, it's not gonna matter, so we're just still gonna use the top fan that's over here. And we're going to leave this capped for now, and I'm gonna take the fan that is up top, doesn't really matter what order you go in, and I'm gonna take where its prongs are exposed, and I'm gonna line the pins up with the holes that are on the RGB, and those two arrows should go together like so. Then you take the fan you haven't connected yet and plug it up together as well, doing the same exact thing. Again, they kind of snap together and those arrows face each other. So you'll have one fan that will leave this uncapped, and you'll have one cord that leaves this exposed, which would go plug into the motherboard or the RGB adapter, which this is the RGB adapter I like to use. And when I do PC flipping, I like to include the one with the remote. I think it's like $7 to $10, depending on what version you get. I like the remote. Otherwise, you have to take the back panel off to change the colors. And you just take this little tip off the end so it exposes these three little connectors here, and you line the holes up with the holes that are in the connectors, and they just snap in. And now you have your RGB, which we will plug up to the power supply here in just a little while. All right, and again, my philosophy of cable managing as we go, you probably could have waited to zip tie the front panel connectors until you were done with this as well. And I like to wrap all these fans together as much as I can, like what you see here. I find with the fans, it helps just to kind of make one big bundle separate from everything. And then once you get it bundled one time, you can kind of attach the bundle to the other side. But I don't want to do that yet so that I have room to put our cables for our power supply in just a second. But at least if it's bundled up, it's kind of out of the way and not as messy as it could be. Now, the power supply we're using is a Thermaltake 80 plus bronze unit. It's got 550 watts. We picked it up on the used market in our local Facebook marketplace for only $30. Now, I have a power supply tester, so I can test used power supplies to make sure they work. You guys may not have that luxury, so in order for you to, keep in the same budget range, I will leave a couple of options on the screen for you to use instead of this one. So our power supply is going to go kind of in this hole right here that's in this big open area. And what we like to do in these fish tank style cases is put the fan facing the outside. So it's going to be just like so, and it's going to set up in the case like this. Now, either your power supply or your case should come with the screws you need, and these are the power supply screws that we're going to be using, and they look like so. And there are 4 screw holes for you to put those screws in. Make sure you get them all in there, and you are good to go. Now we get to talk about all of these cables. Now, before we plug up these cables, one of my recommendations is if your case does have an HDD supply basement, especially on these fish tank style cases, you can take it out so that you have more room for your cable management. Now, a quick rundown of the cables. This is a SATA cable connector, so you'll have a few of these. This is called Molex, which most cases do not use these days, but in case you do have some older fans, they might use these types of connectors. You have your 24-pin power connector, which looks like this. Your CPU cable is kind of split evenly, half and half, which has got 4 and 4 for an 8-pin CPU connection. And depending on how big your power supply is, you may have 1 or 2 PCIe. So they have 3 connectors like so, which is a 6-pin plus 2 to make it an 8-pin power connector for your GPU that we will use here in a little while. So the first cord I like to plug up is the CPU connector. And again, we're going to kind of keep the cable management as clean as possible. And so what I like to do is it's going to go in the upper right hole right here, and we're going to push it through that gap as far as it can go and give ourselves as much slack as we can so that it'll kind of be up here. And we're probably going to, pull it across to line up with all these here in just a sec. Our next connector is our 24-pin power connector, and it's going to go right beside the motherboard, and we're going to squeeze it out through the side here. Now, I would not put it in this little gap. I would put it through the same gap that our fans kind of went through over here on the side, and try to clear the path through the other cables if at all possible, like hold these other cables back so that we can slide it through. And again, like the other, I'm going to push it through to give myself some slack so that I'll have plenty of room to find it and plug it into the hole that it needs to go in. And then lastly, our GPU cable. There's a couple different options for this. You can try to squeeze it underneath here where we plugged in the other cord so it comes out from the bottom, or you can also put it through the side where the fan comes in. It doesn't really matter, but you just plug it, push it through either one of those spots and get it underneath so that you can plug up the graphics card here in a minute. I personally like sliding it underneath. Now, the only thing in our build that uses one of these SATA connectors is our fan hub that we just plugged up. So we're going to plug the fan up here. Again, don't force these things. They should only plug up one way. So once you get it connected, you should be fine there to be able to cable manage the rest of it. Now we have everything kind of facing where we need. It doesn't really matter what order you plug these up in, but our 24 pin, there is a clip on the side. It should be facing to the right, and you're gonna plug it into the 24 pin connector that is right here. Just line it up and make sure it's in there real good. And then again, like we did with the motherboard cords earlier, push the excess cables back so that we can have some room to, and we want it to look as clean as possible on this side. All right, next we have our 8-pin CPU cables. And with this particular motherboard, we only need 4 of them. So what you can do is you can kind of pull them opposite directions and they kind of pop apart right like this. And our motherboard connector is right there. I hope you can see that. Now, hopefully you can see the 4-pin motherboard connector right there. There is kind of a tab right here on the side of that. And on the side, that's kind of where we want our little clip to go. So we're going to take this clip, and again, ours is kind of on the right. So it's gonna be kind of going in like so from the right and going right into that little port right there. And we're gonna push the excess cord through the back as much as we can so it will be plugged up just like so. And unfortunately, with the way that these 4-pin connectors are, there's not a whole lot we can do right there. You can kind of pull the cords apart if you want a little bit more so that you can stub the extra back towards the back. That might help with the looks a little bit, but that's about the best we can do with a $300 PC. Now, before we plug in the last cable, we need to plug in our graphics card. And the graphics card we're using in this build is the GTX 1060. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that it goes in the uppermost slot. This is called the PCIe slot, and it's going to go in the uppermost slot right here. You're going to push this tab all the way back, and you're going to make sure that this is lined up correctly and goes in the hole like so. But in order to do that, you're probably going to have to remove one of these metal casings right here. And so you're going to have to bend it kind of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, in order to get it to break off. Nicer cases that are more expensive, these don't have to be broken off. You can just take them out, but that's what we have to do with this. So now that those 2 holes are exposed, we can just easily see that that's where our graphics card's gonna go. Then we take this part off the side right here, and it kind of opens up like a door, and just don't lose that screw because you might need it later, or you will need it later. And now that we have that open, we can just gently line up everything into the slot here. Again, you want to make sure everything's lined up correctly, and you're just going to snap it in, and you might hear a small click, maybe not, just depends, and you will have it in. Then you can close this back down and you kind of lift up the graphics card. And I typically put 2 of these power supply screws back in the side over here to kind of hold my graphics card into place. All right, once we have the graphics card connected back up, we're gonna take our pin with the clip for the graphics card, this PCIe cable. It's gonna have the kind of chip clip looking thing here. It's gonna be facing downward. Every graphics card may be slightly different. Again, you just look for that lip. Ours is gonna be facing downward, and we're gonna plug it right there into the graphics card. Make sure it's nice and snug. You might hear a little click, you might not, just depends on how much pressure you apply at the right time. And I went ahead and like zip tied these 2 cords together because we're only using part of it. Makes it look a little neater, about as neat as you can get with a power supply like this. And we'll go back and snip all these extra as we go along. Now that we have everything plugged up, we do want to kind of do our final run of cable management. And again, you can just kind of like tuck everything together like so. And that's kind of what I like to do. Doing the cable management that we did earlier kind of helps us to do that. The other option is to kind of raise up some of the cables and put them up in here and put the tray back so that it will kind of block some of the cables as much as possible. But my style of cable management is not that good because it's really hard in these tiny cases. And so again, what I like to do is try to bundle stuff up together as much as you can. And I would tuck these cables in as much as possible, all like so. And again, you could, I said again like 14 times, but you could just put one big zip tie around all this if you want, but I like to just keep all of that together like this. That way it's easy to undo stuff if you need to later. And then I would put the HDD tray back in. So if I needed to, if I needed to tuck some extra cables in behind it, I could, and that way, you know, it wouldn't be as much, but this is gonna shut just fine. So we're gonna put the back panel back on it, and then we'll see if it will actually work or not. All right, now it's time for the moment of truth to see if the PC actually turns on. And we're gonna press the power button, and bam, we got it. We have life. And we got our little RGB controller here where we can change the RGB, and there's several different modes that we can change here. I like this green. There's a green and orange mode, which I think is cool because, you know, those are my colors. My brother's favorite color is green. My favorite color is orange, so the green and orange is kind of cool. And we do have a proper boot. It just says reboot and select proper boot device. We don't have Windows installed. So let me show you how to set up that USB, and then we'll install Windows. So to install Windows, you're gonna need at least an 8 GB flash drive, and we're gonna plug it up to our computer. You will also need a computer that can actually run Windows. Maybe it's a laptop, a school laptop, go to the public library if they'll let you download stuff there, but you need something that already has Windows. Then we're gonna pull up our files and we're gonna go to the flash drive that we just put in there. Mine's named Sam Data there. What we're gonna do is rename this as Windows so that I know what it is and don't accidentally delete something later on. All right, then we're gonna right click and we're gonna format. Okay, I've FAT32 NTFS. I've used both of those with no issues. Some people argue over that on the internet, but I don't think it's a big deal. So we're gonna click start, and it's gonna erase everything. So if you don't want anything erased, use a different flash drive. Once that's done, we wanna go to a web browser and find Windows Installation Media. Just click it, type it in the search bar. It'll be one of the first thing that pops up, and you're gonna look for create an installation media for Windows. It's gonna be on Microsoft.com, and you can choose Windows 10 or Windows 11. Personally, I like to use Windows 10 and then upgrade to Windows 11 for free if your hardware allows it. What we're gonna do is we're gonna click download now, save as, and just put it, you know, somewhere. Downloads is fine. And then we're gonna open the media creation tool. And it's gonna take a little while to set up this whole process. So, you know, go make you a snack, a sandwich, chill, watch one of my other YouTube videos. That would be a great idea. All right, and then in a few minutes, it'll be done with this process, and we'll get to create an installation USB flash drive. That's what we wanna do. We're gonna click next, next, USB flash drive. All right, and then this is why we named our drive, because we don't want to accidentally delete something, you know? We wanna make sure that we click the one that we labeled window, click next, and this is the process that takes the longest. So process is gonna take a little while. So after you let it run to 100, it'll say your USB flash drive is ready, and you'll just click finish. All right, once you have your Windows USB ready to go, I like to use Windows 10 to install Windows, and then you can upgrade to Windows 11 later, but Windows 10 just helps me set it up for PC flipping better. And you just plug the USB into the back of your case in your motherboard, and what we're gonna do is we turn the PC off by flipping the switch on the power supply. Then we're gonna flip the switch back on, and when we boot it up, it should boot to our USB drive and go straight into the Windows setup. And again, I think the PC looks pretty good. Since it's got red RAM, you know, we probably should use the red lights, but you know, it doesn't really matter. You could always do some different things. These cards are good for like spray painting, so you could spray paint the card, paint the outer rim of the RGB there. All of that would be good things to do. But here we go, we have the Windows logo up, and we'll be able to install Windows. All right, so this is the screen here to install Windows. We're just gonna click next, install now. And I don't have a product key, but you can get any kind of Windows product key, whatever you would like. If you want to go SCD key, GVG Mall, those kind of places, they will give you one. It's an OEM key. If you want to buy a legit copy of Windows, you know, it's like $100. But you can just click, I don't have a product key. And I like to do Windows 10 Pro. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Home or maybe these other things, but Windows 10 Pro is my favorite. Accept the terms and click next. Then we want to do custom install. And here we want to click your drive, which I only have a one drive, 500 GB SSD. Yes, you're not gonna get the full 500 gigs, so it is gonna take some of this off here, so you will notice that. To turn my light off so it'd be maybe a little easier to see this. I don't know if it was too much, but we gotta let all this run, and when this is done running, then we will be able to come back and ready to start more. After it gets done with this, it may reboot the system. Just FYI, that's not the end of the world. All right, it's back up now, so we're gonna click United States, yes. US, yes. Skip that. Ethernet, I'm gonna click I do not have internet because I like to set it up without that. Continue with limited setup. Of course, if you have internet and this is your actual personal gaming PC, you feel more than welcome to set it up the way you want, but I'm gonna type in user. And what I like to do for PC flipping is hit enter with no password because I don't want password. I actually have it it set up this way on my main PC because I like it to just boot straight up, because right now I don't have anyone at home that would abuse my PC in any way. And it's gonna go through the Windows setup, and when it's done, we'll be back. All right, so now we are completely loaded up into Windows, and so let's take a look at the task manager. And as you can see, for our CPU, we're rocking the Ryzen 2600 with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, right now they're running at 2400 megahertz. I'll show you how to enable XMP in a minute, and we will make this go up. And we have our SSD, and that's our USB drive and our Ethernet. Before you do anything else, what I like to do is let Windows do all of its updating stuff. So when you install Windows the way that we did, you're probably gonna have a lot of stuff that needs to install in Windows. So let all of this run its course, and when it's all done, we'll come back. All right, now that we have Windows updated, we will install Windows 11 later, but right now we just wanna leave it at Windows 10. And we're gonna go to NVIDIA, and we wanna download the NVIDIA app. It should be the first thing that pops up, and it's gonna ask you to, accept the cookies, that's fine, and then download the beta, that's what we want. All right, once the app's downloaded, we'll do game ready drivers next. However you wanna do this is fine. I like to just pick my own settings in games, but that's totally up to you. I will use the NVIDIA overlay some, so I'll leave that. Then we're gonna go over here to drivers, and we're gonna download the latest drivers. And once that gets done downloading, it'll pop up for you to actually install it. I always click install, accept it, and then I always do express installation, continue, and let it do its thing. The screen will flicker a few times off and on right here, so don't freak out about that. Just let it do its thing, and when it's done, you'll be ready to download some games. When it's done, we're gonna have to restart the computer. And the last thing I wanna talk about is, if you remember when we were going over the task manager, our memory speeds are only at 2400 megahertz. So before you start playing any games, I do wanna show you how to switch that. So what we're gonna do is we're going to restart the computer, and while it's restarting, we are gonna spam the delete button on our keyboard. And what this allows us to do is to get into the BIOS, and inside the BIOS, we should be able to have a setting in here. Now, this motherboard BIOS is a little bit different. A lot of times they have like a setting that will say enable XMP or DOCP or something like that, but this particular computer does not have that. In fact, it just, it says this is our memory frequency, 2400 megahertz or mega transfers per second. And so over here we have a turbo. Sometimes it may be under the advanced settings, but over here under turbo, we're gonna see AXMP, which is what we want to enable. And sometimes you can't click it, you may have to hit enter on the keyboard, but we wanna do XMP profile number 1, which is gonna give us our 3200 megahertz. Once we enable this, we just have to press F10, which will let us save and exit, and it should boot up the computer. And when we're done, we'll be able to see that we're running at 3200 megahertz. And we're back in after that, and you can see the speed on our RAM is now 3200 megahertz. So let's download some games and see how it performs. Now, since this was a $300 gaming PC, we didn't spend a ton of time testing it, but we wanted to test, the basic games. And all these games were tested at 1080p. First, we tested Valorant, and we did all kinds of settings, low, medium, high, and they were pretty much all the same. The most consistent FPS I was able to get was 165 when I capped it. Apex Legends was pretty smooth at either max settings or low settings, and it ranged from around like 100-ish FPS to 150 FPS, depending on the settings. Fortnite was a little bit of a disappointment. DX12 was absolutely terrible, so you definitely want to play this on performance mode. And if you land at a hot drop a couple times and die off the rip, then on about the third or fourth game, your FPS will kind of balance out, and we were able to get around like 165 FPS, and it was pretty solid, with 1% lows being in the 60 to 100 range. You might could cap it a little lower, but it was pretty good. And then Warzone, the Resurgence game mode, you definitely want to use some sort of upscaling. FSR got us around like 70 FPS at 1080p on the basic preset settings, and with frame generation and FSR combined, we were able to get pretty close to 100 FPS, and to me that's pretty smooth, but that's totally up to you. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments. But if you want to spend about $100 extra, you can get a way better PC right here.